If you want to see how I made this 3D custom VTuber from a single vertice on up to the final product, then please keep watching. Hi, I'm Hatsumi. I make 3D models for VTubers. I was requested to make a 3D model from scratch for my client based from this reference provided, but I was told that I could deviate from the reference and stylize it a bit more. I will be explaining my thought process, so I hope you learned something new, and let's get into it. Starting out with the face, using a vertex to outline the eyes and slowly extrude into a mask shape. Then I built basic contours using the edge on the outer part of the eye because I find this method easier to make faces. This way, you can create the mouth more easily without guessing how to bridge the mouth and cheeks together. I really wanted to focus on improving and creating an attractive side view silhouette, so I used the grab sculpting tool a lot to redefine my shapes without having to edit the mesh too much. I also tried to keep the poly count pretty reasonable on the back of the head as well, because the back of the head isn't seen. I work on adding any additional missing details before cleaning up the head and moving on to the hair. Creating the hair, I use a sphere cut in half. I rip apart the edges with V and outline the shapes according to my reference. Since the bangs are broken into 3 separate pieces, I wanted to make sure I nailed the shape language in 3D. So I broke everything into pieces and then joined them back later. I'm debating on creating a hair tutorial for my next video. Is that something you guys will be interested in? If so, comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more 3D content in the future. I repeat the process on the back of the hair, adding in more layers and joining the back pieces that were once separated. With this hair, I didn't want to directly copy the reference, so I made a few adjustments while trying to maintain the shape language of the original concept. You don't see it here, but I used a solidified modifier to give the hair more thickness in the final product. I duplicated part of the torso to create the shirt. Even though this character wears a jacket, I still added subtle details within the shirt. I repeat the same method for making the shorts. I did remove some body details from the shorts because when you're copying it from the body, it's important that you remove those details, as you wouldn't typically have that, especially in bagging clothing. Creating the belts using a curve with a front fill mode, low resolution, and round geometry. Making belts or any sort of strap this way is very easy because we can quickly manipulate the shapes with curves versus if we were going to model it by hand. I refined the shapes and add sharp edges to highlight the details. The jacket is made the same way as the shorts and the shirt. I do this because when you have two meshes with similar topology, it helps reduce clipping when weight painting. Making this model actually wasn't too hard. It was pretty straightforward and relaxing. The thing that is interesting about 3D is there are so many ways that you can create something. So I tried out a lot of different methods that I wouldn't normally do. If you are a 3D modeler yourself, what is something that you like to model and something that you don't like to model? Leave your answers in the comments below. The last thing we are making are the shoes. Start out by outlining the sole of the shoe with a plane and then connect the pieces. I changed the origin point and added a mirror modifier so that it stays symmetrical on one foot. Here, I had to use more of my knowledge to make adjustments fit in a 3D space and rely on using front-facing reference to use more round shape language as I felt this would have fit the model more. I think it still turned out pretty good, speaking that the shoe itself consisted of many different parts. With everything being made, we are ready for the UVs. For the face UVs, I mirrored everything and kept the face details on one map. Marking the seams for the body, I prefer to keep the body one piece, but separate the arms, hands, and feet. I wanted to focus on using more space, but also having more details, so I put the shoes, jacket, clothing, and accessories on their own texture maps, and I reduced the resolution down a bit later. Using Yuku paint for layering, we can start the textures. Since I had creative control over the shading, I wanted some simpler textures but something slightly reminiscent of textures you would see in 3D gacha games. So I laid down basic gradients and hard shadows with lighter edges. I was a bit lost on how I should approach shading the shoes. So with Yuku paint, I generated a grayscale paint base for the shoes and then set the layer mode to multiply. This gave me a solid basis on lighting and shadows, and all I had to do was paint in hard shadows with a little more refinements. Hugely recommend Yuku paint for Blender if you guys are not using it, by the way. I import the remaining textures into Clip Studio Paint for cleanup and detailing since I have better brush options in this program. I mostly prefer to texture in Blender with a mouse because it's quicker, but it really doesn't matter what program you use. Usually I use Blender, but I do minor cleanups in Clip Studio Paint. For some of these textures, I had to use Clip Studio Paint for the details because I had to add the jacket textures and it was easier to paste it on the UVs in Clip Studio Paint, especially when you're using a drawing tablet. Using the same principles for the hair, I started with a gradient at the bottom and then I did some rough blockouts of how I wanted the hard shadows to look. Since I didn't have a plan beforehand, I erased until I'm happy with it and then I made sharper edges. I used a purplish color on the multiply layer with the opacity turned down for the hard shadows. The shading on this model was completely freestyled, so I mainly just went with the flow and what I felt looked good in the moment. go too into detail about the weight painting. This is a base I made, but I redid the weight painting from scratch. I mostly smooth out the hard edges and test the weights on each axis to make sure I have smooth deformations. Other than that, that's all I can really say. I use robust weight transfer tool, which I recommend because it's pretty accurate, and then I clean up the weights from there. Lastly, I added in additional bones to the hair and the halo, and that's about it. This model doesn't have many bells or whistles when it comes to physics. I made all 52 Arkit blend shapes, which that is another can of worms. I can't really explain it. I can probably do a video on it in the future, but these are essential blend shapes that we need for Arkit face tracking. I wanted something a bit more natural and not too stylized with the tracking. The last tip is to model the insides of your clothing with something like this jacket or the shorts. If you have body shrink blend shapes and you don't want the inside of the body to be seen, I recommend doing this method to cover things up. You can see the difference on how it looks much cleaner with the inside model versus how it doesn't look as clean when you can see straight into the model. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in